Greetings. So, I'm going to tell you something. I've never talked about this before, but I've talked about Harry Potter a lot. This is going to be my third Harry Potter video, and I've mentioned it in some of my other videos. At least 3 times a year, I do the books and the movies around the same time. So I always start with the book, and I do recorded books. I do that, and when I get halfway, then I'll start watching the movie, because I like to end them both somewhat around the same time period. It doesn't work so well with the older books because they're much longer than the early books. Still, I kind of stay close to it. And I do that just because it just makes me feel good. I really enjoy those movies. I listen to the soundtracks all the time. As a matter of fact, I have the long form of it where I've moved all the soundtracks into one playlist on both the home computer and on my smartphone. So I can just start it and let it play. And I've put them all in order the way they are in the movies because the soundtracks on the DVDs or on the CDs aren't always in that order, which is irksome, but I deal with it. Anyway, I notice once again that there are things that if you've only watched the movies, you probably don't know some of the backstory or what leads to certain things that you either see or you've never even thought much about. And I'm going to give you 5 of those. I'm only doing 5 because last time I did 9 and that video was almost 30 minutes long. We're going to see if I can keep this one closer to 10 or 12 minutes. At least we're going to give it a shot. So here's the first thing. What most people who probably have seen the movie but not read the books don't know is that before Harry met Hagrid and before you saw in the movie where he released the snake by having that glass leave when he was at the zoo, what you don't know is that Harry actually did a lot of accidental magic, but he had no clue that he was a wizard. So he's just doing these things whenever he was stressed in some way or, upset. So for instance, one of the things that he did, one time he was being chased by Dudley and his friends, and next thing you know, he's on the roof of the school. I mean, imagine that one. He had another time where they always hated his hair because it's always stressed that his hair was really messy. So Aunt Petunia cuts his hair off. It looks really horrible, and he's embarrassed. The next morning, it's back. And every time one of these things happened, they punished him by putting him back in his cabinet underneath the stairs and wouldn't give him food for days. There's some serious child abuse. So the Dursleys were actually much worse in the books than they are in the movies. So we just can hate them forever. Although Dudley does come around eventually, but the parents, nah, ain't got no use for them. So he did a whole lot of magic. So when Hagrid says to him, have you ever done anything when you were, upset that you didn't know about? Most people might think it's only the snake. There's a whole lot of that. Here's the second one. So we get to the 7th movie. And in the 7th movie, we see Harry keeps pulling out this mirror and he's looking at this mirror. And even near the end of the first Deathly Hallows movie, you see Luna say, that's a funny place, a funny thing to keep in your sock. Well, here's the thing. That actually comes up in the 5th book, Order of the Phoenix. After Sirius is killed and Harry is trying to pack stuff away, he finds out that in the bottom of his trunk, there's this broken mirror. And then he remembers at Christmas time, Sirius gave him this mirror. And he didn't know it was a mirror until he opened it up, something was broke. And he realizes after he reads the note that this is a way he and Sirius could have communicated where, Sirius would have always had it on him. So if Harry had actually gone to the mirror, then they'd have been able to talk and he would have been able to find out at that time that Sirius was not at the ministry, that he was okay. So anyway, he starts carrying that around in the 7th movie and book, but in the book, Hagrid had given him this birthday gift where he had this pouch where he could put anything in it and no one else could ever get in it. So he actually had it there. But in the movie, you just see him all of a sudden looking at this mirror. It's like, well, what's that? It's a great plot line, but it actually comes from Order of the Phoenix. So that's something you didn't know. Now, here's the third one. The Snape and James conflict. Well, we learn a little bit of this, but not much in the second Deathly Hallows movie, where, you know, you see the flashbacks that he has of James, you know, running through and, you know, giving him grief and whatever. Obviously, that's from Snape's side of things. But what we don't know is that it first comes up in the first book, in Philosopher's Stone or Sorcerer's Stone, which we call it here in America, when Dumbledore tells Harry, after Harry says, "Why does Professor Snape hate me so much?" And Dumbledore tells him because his dad did something to him that he's never been able to forgive. And Harry says, "What's that?" And he says he saved his life. Well, that sounded really weird, but that's in the book. You don't find out about any of this kind of stuff until you pretty much hear Snape in the fifth movie talking about your father was lazy and he's all these other kind of things, whatever. Well, because in essence, he had this crush on Lily forever. He had this crush on her before they got to school. We know that because we saw Deathly Hallows. But she ends up with James, who the very first day on the train, when they're, you know, going to the school, they hate each other from the start. The same thing happens in the movie in, oh my goodness, in Sorcerer's Stone between Harry and Draco. In the book, it happens on the train, which is the same thing that happened to Snape and to James, but in the movie, it happens when they're already in the school. So anyhow, they always had this long conflict, and Snape was always getting into this stuff. He would always spy. In the books, Snape knew that there was something odd about Lupin at the time because he seemed to go missing once every month. And so he figured out, okay, there's something going on. He didn't know about the werewolf thing at the time, but he finds out. James ends up saving him because Sirius was going to play a trick on him, which would have got him killed. James finds out about it. He goes and saves Snape. So Snape, this is him and Dumbledore eventually having their version of a relationship, although it wasn't the same as it was with Dumbledore and Harry. But, you know, they have this kind of conflict thing that always went on. And he could not forgive himself because what we don't know in the movie, but you know in the book, is that he gets really mad and he calls Lily a mudblood. And that pretty much ended their friendship. But he always had this love for her. And he knew that he's the one who drove her eventually to James. Even though early on she didn't like James, eventually they get there. And James turns out to be a better person than he had been when he was really young. So, there you go. Here's one that if all you've seen in the movies, you don't really have a clue about Charlie. Charlie was Ron's second oldest brother after Bill. And here's the thing. You actually see a picture of someone who they never name in the beginning of Prisoner of Azkaban when they show this picture of the Weasley family going to visit Bill in Egypt, and Charlie is there, and there's this picture of this guy. And the reason you probably wouldn't even recognize who it's supposed to be is because the guy who ended up playing Bill is not the same guy who's in the picture. So, you know, you wouldn't have known which one was which. Anyway, he had this brother Charlie, and Charlie, obviously, he had gone to Hogwarts. Charlie was a great Quidditch player. Matter of fact, they said he was good enough to be in the professional leagues, but he had this thing about dragons. He loved being with Hagrid. He loved meeting Hagrid. He loved the thing about all the animals. So when he graduated, he went to train dragons over in Romania. And he's the one where in the fourth movie, when Hagrid learns about the dragons, well, Hagrid, already kind of knew about it. But when he takes Madame Maxine and Harry to see the dragons, it's actually Charlie with his folks that he worked with who brought the dragons over so that you could have the first contest. So you have that, and actually you have Charlie in the book. He's in the seventh book, where he's helping to fight Voldemort and the Death Eaters, but we don't see that. And also, we found out about Norbert. Remember, in the first movie, Hagrid wanted this dragon, and he names the dragon baby Norbert. Well, it turns out that in the book, they figure out a way to get Norbert out of there, and it's Charlie who sends his friends to pick up Norbert and fly him back to Romania. So there's these tie-ins with Charlie, but we never see him in any of the movies. That's too bad, because, you know, Ron actually talked about how many brothers he had, but you'd never really see anything about Charlie. And Charlie actually shows up in the 7th book when Bill's getting married in the 7th book, and he would have been at the wedding. He was supposed to be the best man, and there you go. They actually have some fun there. It's a funny part. It's in the book. So there you go. That's Charlie. And here's the 5th thing. And this 5th thing I'm going to mention is going to slightly mess up your thoughts about the first Deathly Hallows movie. So Umbridge is a nasty piece of work. We all know that. And what happens in the book, which we don't see in the movie, is that during the Owls, where they're supposed to be taking all these tests, they're up in the astronomy tower taking the astronomy test, and Umbridge and a whole bunch of ministry, whatever they want to call those guys, go out to Hagrid's hut. And they're going to try to arrest him and put him in Azkaban. And they're hitting him with these stunning spells, but they don't work on him. They totally bounce off him because he's half giant. And it means his hide is supposed to be really strong. So the stunning spells don't work. And he smacks a bunch of them around as they're trying to do whatever. And then they hit Fang. He's mad. He smacks a couple more of them. Then he picks up Fang and he runs off. So they can't capture Hagrid. You know, he fights it. Dumbledore's not there because the first time when he went in the 2nd movie, Dumbledore was there. And Dumbledore said, you know, yes, we will do that. The minister was there. And you know, there you go. Well, anyhow, if you knew that because of the book, then in the 7th movie, when Harry is riding with Hagrid and he's in the sidecar and Hagrid is running the motorcycle and they stun him and he passes out. And now Harry has to reach up to do that. But if you remember the 5th book, he couldn't get stunned. That doesn't happen in the book because they couldn't stun Hagrid. As a matter of fact, Hagrid was so tough, this is freaky, that he gets mad and he jumps off the motorcycle onto a Death Eater. Harry's like by himself, like, what the devil? Hagrid, what are you doing? And he's screaming for it. Nothing he can do. I mean, he figures out his way to somehow get down safely. Hagrid ends up being fine. You know, the guy, I don't know how far he fell, but he fell basically in marshy grass. So it was a little soft. He still gets himself knocked out, but he's fine. Because I'm just imagining every time I get to that part in the book, like, yeah, that's just the smartest thing you could ever think about doing, is just leaping off something in the middle of the, you know, of the sky to take someone out without thinking about how you're going to land. Silliness. Anyway, those are 5 things that if all you know are the movies, then you don't know that that stuff's in the book. So let's see how long this one ends up being. I think I missed that 10-minute thing, but it's not going to be 30 minutes, so we're going to be good. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on any of these things. If you have some other stuff, you'll see that I have kind of linked to the other 2 videos that I did at some point. Check those out, and we can talk about it or not. But like I said, since I've started doing this series again, I wanted to talk about it again. And just remember, in my defense, I was left unsupervised. Y'all take care.